Hi, everyone. Sorry. I'm Noor. I'm project manager at BAF, and I'm just going to make a quick intro to BAF for those of you who are new to BAF before I leave the stage to Roman and Virat. So we're very happy to host today's event. BAF is a 501c3 nonprofit that starts university-accredited blockchain courses. We build projects. We love connecting our members to opportunities and resources in the industry. And what's very cool about BAF is that we're governed by the leaders of our affiliated university blockchain clubs. And we're very happy to collaborate with the blockchain club today at Harvard. We're very thankful for all the support that we get from our sponsors who made all of this work possible. BAF is funded by Algorand Foundation, Protocol Labs, Ethereum Foundation, and many other incredible individual donors that we want to thank today. To co-organize this week's event about miner extractable value with the leadership team at blockchain at Harvard. Thank you, Georgios and Ro today. Congrats and Roman for taking the lead and moderating today's event. Also, special thanks to our content team led by Sebastian and all the hard work they put in promoting today's event and getting all of you guys here with us. So yeah, and now I'll leave it to Blockchain at Harvard to moderate today's event.
Hey guys, I'm Virat. Again, thank you to everyone involved to help put this together, especially Georgios and Robert and the team at BAF. I'm just a quick background. I'm a philosophy and German major at Harvard and a co-founder of the Harvard Blockchain Club with Roman. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm also a co-founder of the Harvard Blockchain Club. I'm a sophomore studying applied math and economics. Really, really fortunate to have Georgios and Robert here. Everyone who's here kind of physically for the event, or I guess at various tables, and people watching at the live stream, we're really excited for this conversation.
Great. So just before we kick off, Georgios, Robert, it'd be great if you introduced yourselves really quickly. Robert, I know Georgios is a research partner at Paradigm. It would be great to give a couple words on what you're doing there. And Robert, you too at Flashbots, although we plan to touch on Flashbots later on in our discussion. So maybe we can save the what is Flashbots for that when we dive deeper.
Yep, happy to. So thank you for having us. Hi, I'm Georgios. I'm from Greece. I work with Paradigm. Paradigm is a venture capital firm in the crypto industry. We invest in companies from very early to very late. And my official title is research partner. What this means is that I do research, which is open research in the industry on topics that we find to be interesting and impactful, such as miner extractable value, but also security, scalability with layer 2, and so on. I do engineering, so we work very closely with our portfolio companies, trying to solve their problems and help them go through some, let's say, hard situations. And also in the investing process, when you look at deep tech projects, you ideally want to have technical experts who can evaluate and tell you whether something works or doesn't. Before Paradigm, I did very similar work as a consultant in the industry, and before that, I was an electrical and computer engineering major.
Hey, everybody. I'm Robert Miller. I'm a steward at Flashbots, and I also lead a couple of our different products. So in particular, I'm the lead of Flashbots Data, where we're building some of the leading data analysis tools on MEV, which we'll touch on a little bit later, like MEV Inspect Pi. I also lead Flashbots order flow. So any transactions or bundles that come to the Flashbots network is my responsibility to build great products around those. I'm fairly technical also, as well as Georgios. Before joining Flashbots, I did privacy preserving machine learning and analytics for large scale enterprises. Before that, I was a quant at a family office. Excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you all so much. I guess just to start off, since the audience probably has varying understandings of what MEV is and may come from different backgrounds, just from a very high level, what is kind of your basic explanation of what MEV is and how it's come to be in kind of its broader relevance for the industry? So I guess to start off, maybe we'll start with Georgios and then Robert.
Sure. So whenever you have a blockchain, there always is a proposer which chooses in what ordering transactions get executed. So Robert submits a transaction, I submit a transaction, Roman and Virat submit a transaction, and then somebody needs to figure out in which order these transactions need to be executed. Sometimes, depending on the order these transactions are executed, somebody may be able to make money off of it. And so MEV is the value that the miner in Ethereum and Bitcoin, we have miners who are the entities that are ordering transactions. So MEV is the value that a miner can extract by reordering, adding, or censoring transactions.
I can give one example of that. So if Georgios was making a huge trade on a decentralized exchange, it would probably move markets a little bit. And it might make the markets be out of sync with other markets that exist on a blockchain. And so one very simple example of miner extractable value, or MEV, would be placing a transaction that arbitraged those markets that Georgios had moved out of sync immediately after Georgios' transaction to be able to capture profit from that arbitrage transaction. And it's called miner extractable value because the miner in ETH1 and Bitcoin and other proof of work systems is ultimately the party that orders transactions. And so they have the, they're like the ultimate gatekeeper of this value. They could place their transaction immediately behind Georgios's and censor or box out anyone else's. So they are the party that gets to choose who can extract this value and ultimately should capture most of it as well. So just wanted to double click with an example there.
Thank you. And kind of, I guess, to go on to that, what is the history of MEV? Kind of how did it come about first, and how's the community developed?
So actually, Robert did a great presentation recently internally at Paradigm and at the offsite of Flashbots about the history of MEV, let's say post Flashbots. So I'll say some things about before Flashbots existed, and maybe Robert can take on that part. So I think that MEV was first observed in a Reddit post in like 2015, 2016, something like that. Classic story where somebody just figured out on a Reddit or on Bitcoin token, whatever. And the dude was saying that basically, you know, miners can reorder transactions and they can make money off of it. But nobody paid too much attention until 2017 or so, 2018, when a group of researchers from Cornell, primarily the group that was with Phil Diane, who is working with Robert right now, found out that on a decentralized exchange called Ether Delta, now long dead, basically people were racing to try to get to orders before others. And by racing, I mean that in Ethereum, when you submit a transaction, you also need to submit a gas price, where the gas price acts effectively as your bid on when you want to get included. And if Robert has bid 5 and I bid 6, I get included before Robert. And so basically what that group observed is that sometimes like somebody would post a bid at 5, then somebody would go at 6, then at 7, and there would be like this race of continuous bids, one after the other. And you know, earlier we talked about miner extractable value, which is the miner exercising their power to reorder transactions, which is happening now. But back then, everybody was basically racing in these priority gas auctions, trying to get in before the other person to try to snatch an opportunity. So that was basically the first time that we saw MEV in the wild, and this created a paper called Flashboys 2.0 as a reference, let's say, to the very popular Flashboys book showing how front running was done in Wall Street in the past. And yeah, that basically kicked off a new era of how on-chain finance worked. And then you would see the same thing happen with liquidations for MakerDAO and Compound and Aave and so on. And maybe Robert, you want to take the after Flashbots era?
Well, I think one last thing in the pre-Flashbots era is I believe that the first instance of a miner exercising their transaction ordering powers was a large miner at the time using their control over transactions to make sure that they were the party that got to buy up a lot of this hot asset that was on sale back in the day in ICOs. I don't know if people these days know what ICOs are, but like an auction, a first come first serve sale of an asset that everyone knew was going to go up in price in just a couple blocks. So a miner exercised their control over transaction ordering to be the first party that was able to buy that and thus profit from it. I think that actually is the very first instance of miners wielding this power, although bots in the mempool playing these priority gas auctions are another instance of miners indirectly capturing MEV through gas fees from those PGA battles. And so what's there to say about Flashbot or MEV, like post Flashbots? I could speak about sort of the complexity or the trends of the markets there. And I'm not sure what you all want, Roman and Virat, whether we talk about that now or later.
I think let's save the Flashbots discussion for just a little bit, because we have a few more questions just about overall MEV that might kind of set the scene, but we'll definitely get into it. So I guess just kind of following up on what you all said, to kind of drill deeper into the different mechanics and the people involved in MEV, I guess I have two questions. So the first question is, what are the different types of MEV that we've seen so far? So the different types of strategies and what those look like. And then the second question is, how do you kind of categorize the different buckets of actors in the MEV ecosystem and the roles that they?
So I'm happy to talk about a couple of the dominant MEV strategies, and then Georgios, feel free to add whatever you know about that I may not, or that I miss. So I think the most simple form of MEV that exists is arbitrage. That happens when decentralized exchange prices get out of sync across two different markets, right? So you buy low in one place, you sell high in another, and you capture some profit, right? And there's even varying levels of complexity here. So, very early on in the MEV marketplace, you could wait an entire block to arbitrage some transactions. So some price inefficiencies rather. So bots would listen to new block updates, and they would see that state has changed such that they could make profit by arbitraging two markets, and to do that at the top of the next block, right? But as the MEV game became more competitive, you needed to backrun pending transactions and be the first person in the block where a market inefficiency was created. So instead of waiting a block, listening for the update, you would look into the mempool and see what other people were transacting, figure out what would cause a market inefficiency that you could arbitrage, and be the very first person after that to place your transaction and arbitrage it. So there's like top of the block arbitrage, then there's back running. Other types of MEV that exist are sandwich bots, which you may have heard of. So if someone is trying to trade on a decentralized exchange, you could, what sandwich bots do is you get in front of their trade and you run the price up. So the person whose trade was about to hit gets a higher price. They push up the price a little bit more, and the bot that ran the price up then sells the assets that they bought in front of the pending trade for a profit. You're forming a sandwich in front of and behind them. And this is fairly extractive. There's an argument for arbitrage creating market efficiencies. It's positive sum, but sandwich attacks are negative sum. They're extractive from users. Other types of MEV that exist are like liquidating under collateralized loans. There's all sorts of fun games on chain that you can play, like literally games. Maybe you have an answer, and so the first person that is able to plug a key or a solution to a game with a transaction on chain can extract some value. So the miner, if they see someone else has this answer to the game, they could copy their transaction and generalize front run it and capture that value. And lastly, I think that there's a bunch of like pseudo randomness on chain that it's manipulatable by miners. It's much less common, but I think that's often an overlooked form of MEV. Georgios, did I miss any of the big categories there?
Oracle backrunning. So,
yeah.
Or did you say that? I don't think you said that.
Liquidations. So,
not exactly though, because for example, let's say we want to take we are in synthetics, and we're looking at an Oracle update. So in DeFi, there's these oracles, right? Oracles are a method are a system that we use to bring off-chain data on-chain. And maybe some systems react to price updates happening on-chain. One such reaction is the liquidation. So Oracle update goes on-chain, suddenly many on-chain positions, loans suddenly become liquidatable. But maybe sometimes if you have, let's say, a protocol that uses, I don't know, leverage, for example, you can front run insert your transaction before the Oracle update, or backrun a transaction after an Oracle update. So maybe let's say in the front run case, to extract free profit, because it's like saying, I know that the price will be $10 higher after the Oracle update gets mined. So I'll buy at the current price, then the Oracle update gets mined, $10 up goes the price, and then I can sell risk-free. So Oracle front running was a very popular thing that was abused in synthetics, and I think it was abused also. It has been tried to be abused in other protocols, and it's very serious, and you should protect against it.
The last thing that I'll add on this other big category, I think, is MEV that is not atomic, which is to say that you're not making profit in a single transaction, but you expect to in the future. So things like being the first party to buy a hot new token that is listed on a decentralized exchange. This kind of non-atomic MEV is increasingly popular.
Touch on kind of the players in the ecosystem. Most of this value extraction, it feels like, is not done directly by the miners, and there are kind of different players that are involved in kind of finding these extractable opportunities, collaborating with the miners, et cetera. If you could just briefly talk about, you know, what the different roles of this marketplace, so to speak, of value are, that would be fantastic.
I mean, the roles are, there's the miner or whoever runs the blocks, there is the searcher, which is the person looking for the MEV, and there is typically some in-between facilitator or the communication channel between the miner and the searcher. If there is no facilitator, then the facilitator is the public mempool. The facilitator can be some private or, well, some direct connectivity channel between a miner and the searcher. So, you know, I have Robert's IP or I have Robert's endpoint and whatever, and I just, you know, I send him a message and tell him, hey, Robert, include my transaction because we're friends. Or maybe there is some form of auction mechanism, or maybe there is some form of like overlay peer-to-peer network that does not gossip all transactions to everywhere. So there's a few different ways to do that part. But, you know, two parties end-to-end and some communication layer in between.
Oftentimes you'll have a third party, which is a regular user who's just like trading on a decentralized exchange, and they create some MEV. I think that's important to remember. Yeah.
So typically users create it by moving the markets around, and searchers close it with some percentage going to the miner.
Nice. Thank you guys for that. That's super informative. Now, I guess, Robert, to come back to Flashbots, you know, what is Flashbots? How did you guys come together? And it would be great to also get a bit more color on like your products, like MEV Inspect, MEV Geth, like kind of to go into a bit of a deep dive on those two would be great as well.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot there, but I will try to do my best in being concise while informative. So Flashbots is a research and development organization that is dedicated exclusively to studying MEV. So we are both research, long-term focused research on MEV, all things related to it, both on Ethereum, other chains, more traditional systems as well, and this development organization, which as you stated, is building products like MEV Inspect, as well as MEV Geth. And both of those things, I think, are super integral to us. So if you're interested in either research or product development around MEV, you should talk to me. You can DM me on Twitter. And I'm sure someone here has my Twitter handle that they can post. But to talk about the products, I think Flashbot's core product offering is MEV Geth, as well as the MEV Relay. And what this is it's a way for searchers to communicate their transaction preferences to miners and participate in an auction for block space that the miner is running. So to get a little more granular into that, we have two ends of this marketplace. We have searchers on one side as well as miners. And searchers will find MEV that can be extracted. So for example, an arbitrage, and construct bundles of ordered transactions that are sent to the Flashbots relay and then forwarded on to the miner. Miners every single block will take all of these different bundles of transactions, simulate them, and run an auction to see which of these is the most valuable for them to mine, which of them will pay them the most MEV. I'm like sort of glossing over some technical details here, but the high level is right. So which of these bundles will pay the miner the most MEV, and places those at the top of blocks. And then the miner, perform proof of work, mines those, and eventually those bundles, if they paid the miner the most and won the auction, are included on chain. And importantly, if you didn't win the auction, your bundle is discarded. It's not included on chain. You don't pay any reverts or failures. So MEV Geth and the MEV relay is this communication channel for transaction preferences, as well as an auction for block space in Ethereum today. And it's, I think, the dominant mode that MEV is extracted today. So MEV Geth orders transactions in about 60 to 65% of all blocks on Ethereum today. And MEV Geth for 100% of blocks that extract MEV by using the miner's powers over transaction ordering is used. So 65% of all blocks, but 100% of the blocks where miners use their transaction ordering for MEV, our software is used. So that's MEV Geth. I can talk about MEV Inspect too, but I saw you unmute. So do you have any
No, I was actually going to ask about MEV Inspect, sort of like a quick, it would be good to quickly understand kind of what that does and how it helps.
Sure. So MEV Inspect is the leading data analysis tool for MEV. So it will look at an individual block, break down all of the transactions, and identify the kind of protocols that are being interacted with by those transactions and the functions being called, and then try to reason about whether they are extracting MEV. So to be specific, it will try to answer the question of, was this transaction an arbitrage, or was it liquidating an under-collateralized loan? If so, how much money was made and how much money was being paid to the miner? And we've done this for a number of the different popular DeFi protocols. I'll grab a place where you can see some of the data from MEV Inspect displayed in a nice dashboard. And this is actually like an ongoing place of R&D at Flashbots. We're working very hard on this. So if there are any folks here that are interested in data science and want to work on MEV, you can please feel free to reach out. And also, I want to add that MEV Inspect, the Rust library, was made by none other than Georgios. So Georgios, I would be remiss if I didn't offer you a chance to say something about MEV Inspect.
Yeah, so we started with MEV Inspect, written by another Flashbots crew member, which was originally written in TypeScript. But as it turned out, we needed to index the chain faster, because basically what it does is it scans block by block, transaction by transaction. And when you unbundle a transaction, each transaction has a thing called the execution trace. So it needs to literally parse every sub-execution state that it entered and kind of match it against a set of heuristics. We don't use machine learning. We don't use anything fancy. We just do, these are a set of patterns that you should be looking for. Try to match them to the best of your understanding. Obviously, we could use more interesting tools, but, time is limited. So we took the TypeScript implementation. I rebuilt it in Rust because I wanted it to be faster. And then a few months ago, now it's being re-implemented in Python, in particularly because the Rust implementation, it was basically very narrowed down to identifying single transaction MEV, atomic in another way. Whereas right after Flashbots became more prominent, let's say among the searcher community, MEV started moving to multi-transaction bundles, such as the sandwich attacks. And right now, a lot of transactions that happen are actually sandwich attacks, or the so-called just-in-time liquidity, which we may talk about later. So basically, a lot of the MEV that you see right now on MEV Explorer is probably unexplored. So the dark forest is bigger than you think.
This is a great transition to the next question, which is going to be kind of more directed at you, Georgios. What are the frontier topics that MEV researchers like yourself are looking at right now? And I think maybe if you do want to offer some more granularity on multi bundles and just-in-time attacks and anything else, it would be great to hear more about.
You're asking for the so-called alpha leak. I see.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Okay.
I should have prefaced it with alpha leak.
I guess that's fair game. Yeah, I think for me right now, the most interesting thing is, so right now, searchers, they find MEV manually. So in their code, they're literally scanning, and they maybe find something. What's really interesting to me is like trying to find it in a more automated way. Potentially, if we can have like a mathematical representation of what MEV means, maybe we can feed it to some automated software and can just find it. So basically the idea would be that in security, in computer security, there's a thing called formal verification. And formal verification says that I have a mathematical representation of my program and I feed it to a solver. Z3 is one very well-known solver, and that solver proceeds to like start exploring all possible states that my program can get into. And so, it will start exploring a very large, enormous tree of possible futures. And if it finds a testing assertion violation, it will terminate and will tell me, hello, this was the error that you got, some assertion got violated. And this is very well known, and this is very well used in computer security for formally verifying the security of programs. But a recent paper by Phil Diane, again from the Flashbots team, showed that we can have a mathematical expression of MEV. So what I'm interested in is figuring out how we can use formal verification, or also known as symbolic execution, concolic execution. There's a very wide set of techniques that you can use to sort of explore MEV in an automated way. And at the limit, this almost makes MEV become a like proof of work mining, effectively. You have a representation of your problem, and then you just throw more hardware at it. And yeah, there's lots of things that I'm excited about, but we can put a full stop on the alpha leak here, and we can talk about more later.
Yeah, that was super interesting. We appreciate the alpha leak, and I hope people were paying attention to that. I guess we've talked a lot about the mechanics of how MEV works, and how Flashbots is part of that ecosystem, and all the different ways of executing MEV. But I guess to zoom out from kind of more of a moral standpoint, so to speak, as participants of this on-chain economy, how do you all think about MEV in terms of, is it a force for good? Is it a force for bad? Is it inevitable? Can we quantify this so-called kind of tax on the ecosystem? Just given how involved you all are with this, I was just kind of curious what your kind of perspective is on the overall goodness of MEV, so to speak.
I think MEV exists, and it's just sort of a fact of Turing-complete blockchains, smart contract platforms that have activity on it, and ergo we have to deal with it. So first, it's a fact, and no matter what other people try to tell you, I think that's true. And I don't think that MEV is either good or bad. It's a result of economic activity and smart contract blockchains that we have to deal with. There is MEV that I think is more positive sum and MEV that is more negative sum. So for example, I would like all sandwich attacks to go away. I think that they're like clearly value extractive, and there are better mechanisms by which we could, I would like that to go away in general. But there are things like arbitrages that bring market efficiency to decentralized exchanges, and they're the whole reason why decentralized exchanges work at all, right? The ability to bring prices back in line between different DEXs or DEXs and centralized exchanges. Or good MEV like the reward that someone gets for liquidating an under-collateralized loan. Like all these things are the reason why you can have open and permissionless economic systems like this. So my short answer is MEV is a fact. There are some MEV that is good. There's some MEV that is bad. We should try to minimize to the extent we can the bad stuff and maximize the democratic extraction of the good stuff.
Great.
I guess there's also, you know, there should be some theorem of conservation of MEV, similarly to how there's the conservation of energy. Basically, no matter what you do, you cannot like avoid it strictly. So typically, the approach is minimize or limit or try to contain it within certain areas in your application, and try to design your application very explicitly to limit the MEV in these boundaries. And when you have defined these boundaries, try to democratize it, so to speak, in the sense that you try to make as many people have access to it in an open fashion, so that a competitive market can form around it, so that it can be extracted efficiently without rent-seeking actors monopolizing it.
And kind of thinking about, you know, Frontier as well in the future, what does MEV look like in ETH2? I will open it to either one of you.
To take that, unless Robert, you have.
Go for it.
So MEV needs to. So the first thing to say is that MEV depends first and foremost on who has the power to reorder things. So in ETH2, nothing changes with respect to the reordering of things. So from a high level, MEV remains the same. What changes in ETH2 compared to ETH1, proof of work, and so on, is that in ETH1 and in general in proof of work, you cannot know who the miner of the next block will be ahead of time. Whereas in ETH2, there is a 12-minute look ahead schedule where I can know the addresses of all the miners. And, you know, maybe they're doxed miners, maybe I can just call them and, you know, be like, hey, Robert, next block, it's you, the block after it's me, the block after it's Roman, you know, why don't we fix the ordering for these next 3 blocks, because, you know, we're gonna make money. So in a way, what I want to say is that because we know who the block proposers will be ahead of time, it is more likely that there will be collusion, which can be problematic. Collusion may have some second order effects with respect to how it gets extracted. However, on the other hand, what we get from proof of stake is finality. Finality every 12 minutes in Ethereum 2, finality in other networks is faster. And what finality gets us is some actual form of security beyond which there is no way that somebody can do crazy things with our protocol. Whereas in proof of work today, if there was an MEV opportunity, you know, 15 minutes ago, which, for example, 2 days ago, a miner received $20-something million from a user of an Ethereum app because they put a wrong gas price. So plausibly, you know, if miners were short-sighted and they want to do crazy stuff, maybe they could try to reorg the chain. Reorg being that, you know, we discard all the current blocks because the miner mined a longer chain with a common ancestor. And maybe the miner would try to reorg the chain to steal all that MEV. And that is typically called the time bandit attack. And time bandit attacks, they typically can be executed in the same way that a selfish mining attack is done on Ethereum or in Bitcoin, and it's typically on the order of 25-30% hash rate. And so in a document that we wrote recently with Vitalik Buterin, we found out that basically in order to execute such an attack, you cannot do it with 25-30% in proof of stake, but due to math, basically the percentage of the stake that you need to own to execute this reliably is something like 48, 49, 47%. So in a way, just to recap, collusion is easier, broad reordering is more or less the same. Reorgs are harder to do on a longer basis due to finality. Fourth, you get it's harder to cause time bandit attacks.
I guess kind of building off on that as well, sort of a bit of a side question is what does MEV look like on other chains? Like what does MEV look like on Solana, Polkadot? Robert, maybe do you have on how it works on these different in these different ecosystems, or do you expect it to be largely, you know, similar?
So MEV is always very specific to the chain that you're looking at and the mechanisms of how that works. It exists, and you shouldn't let anyone tell you otherwise. People love to claim that MEV doesn't exist on other chains. But you may just be playing a different game to extract the MEV than what exists on ETH layer 1. So for Solana, I anticipate that it's a game having the lowest latency possible. So finding a validator and co-locating your code with them, or turning your validator's code into a bot itself in order to have the lowest latency possible. And then optimizing your code such that you can fit your MEV transactions in within tens of milliseconds, or maybe on a lower level scale. I'm not sure how quick it is, but MEV on that kind of system exists. It's just about latency. You have some other chains which work in different ways. So Avalanche, it's also a game of having a validator. There's some games you can play with, like having advantageous places in the mempool so that transactions propagate to you more, or being selected more as part of this random selecting sequence in a consensus mechanism. This may not make sense, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is that each of these chains, if you dig into the details, has a game that you can play to extract MEV. And so if you want to talk about a specific chain, we can kind of get into those details, but that's like the high level picture that I'll leave you with is you need to look at the chain, find its details, figure out the game that can be played to extract the MEV. And then
the
I think
takeaway,
kind of the meta level question, and then I'll let you jump in, Georgios, is what is the types of games that we want MEV extractors to be playing, right? So do we want to create Wall Street style HFT latency wars everywhere? Or do we want to create a system where MEV extractors are optimizing on efficiency like what exists on Flashbots today, right? So the searchers, the MEV extractors that end up winning the Flashbots auction are those who can extract MEV in the most efficient ways possible, that take up the least amount of space and leave space for everyone else to transact in, right? So I think that the meta level question is figure out what the things you want to optimize for and the games you want searchers to be playing. And sorry to keep on talking, Georgios. What did you have to say?
with all that, basically, anytime there's no market, it's always going to be latency. And latency typically means, big firms collocating lots of big machines, and it's not accessible to the guy in a basement. Whereas right now, there's people actually in their basements doing very interesting things. And you want to keep it as equitable as possible.
I know at least one person that's paid off their college loans through MEV, which is pretty cool. That'll never happen on Solana. It's only possible on a system like Flashbots, I think.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I guess one last question from us, because I know we want to open it up to kind of the audience. So if you're in the audience, you have a question you're sitting on, definitely put it in the Q&A tab, and then we'll spend the last 10 minutes or so just kind of going through those. But I guess just to kind of zoom out a little bit, given what MEV has looked like kind of in the past, what it looks like now, and kind of the trajectory it seems to be on, what is your best guess? And I know it's kind of an impossible question, but of what MEV looks like, 5 to 10 years from now? Is this the new kind of HFT where, all our best and brightest quants are going to be going to institutions that specialize on MEV? Or is this something that is very widely distributed across all kinds of people, as you said, who kind of do it out of their basements? Is this an industry that's going to become increasingly professionalized? How do you think about what MEV could look like in the future? And I think as students, this is kind of particularly interesting to us.
My goal at Flashbots is to build a system that is open, permissionless, and maximizes competition with the lowest barriers to entry possible. And so my hope is that anyone in this audience in 5 years, or today even, could pick up, start competing, and be competitive and extract MEV themselves using Flashbots and the systems we build in 5 years. And if that's not true, I don't think that we've been successful at what we're doing. So.
Great. I think we're going to start going through audience by most least popular. We've got an easy one so far, and I wonder if the transaction the other day has something to do with it. But what's the highest MEV that's been extracted so far?
So there was the $27 million fee, you're right. And Georgios, I don't think anything has gotten higher than 27 million, right?
Extracted, really. And also, I believe it was given back.
I mean, it's
So
like
that-
minor extractable value because the miner was paid, right? It's not like it could have gone to anyone else, but I see what you mean. So, well, like there was the transaction fee thing, and then I know of a $2 million ARB. Do you have anything larger than that, Georgios?
Not like many in the range of 500 to 800,000,
Yeah.
but I don't remember larger.
So there was
I think the largest ones, well, okay, one could say that a very large one could have been the one. So last night, Compound Finance had a bug which allowed somebody to like claim a lot of comp if they were the first person providing borrowing or from a market or something like that. So I guess you could say that any miner could have seen this kind of transaction, front run it, and extracted the money. You could also say that any big hack could have been MEV because anybody would just be able to copy trade the hack and do it for themselves. So, you know, it's a bit debatable what is and what is not. But yeah, I would say what Robert said, the 2 million one would be the most like actual one.
I guess next question.
Like just to add one extra point on this.
Go for
There's
it.
also the argument that, you know, if when MEV becomes like, you know, it's still very early now, but if it becomes like 10x what it is right now, could there be some miner that gets compelled by law enforcement to include or not include transactions of a certain format? So right now, miners, for example, they do not include transactions to OFAC addresses. What if this happens? What if the same thing happens where miners get required to run static analysis, some kind of analysis software on top of every transaction that they process? And if that transaction gets classified as MEV, maybe the software that they run is MEV inspect, who knows? Maybe, so, you know, maybe every miner ends up having to run MEV inspect as part of their compliance process, the same way that they all run chain analysis software, for example. And then, you know, hacks stop happening at the mempool level because of that. But then that's the happy side of it. Then the darker side of it is, you know, the market stops being free.
To hog the what you said, maybe this is a question on my end, but does it follow that as the TVL of DeFi increases, and if we see it go up, let's say 10x or 20x, does it follow that the quantum of MEV extractable increases in proportion with it, or is that just not the case?
Super linear. MEV grows super linearly to the complexity of the system, I think.
Great. The big caveat is if people adopt like more intelligent mechanism design, right? Something like that. But yeah.
Right. In general, you would expect that developers try to design their applications in a way to minimize MEV, but I don't think we're at that stage of education yet. It will happen eventually, but it requires effort. And also, you know, anytime you try to add extra countermeasures to things, it means you make them more expensive, more complex to use. Like there's usually some kind of usability versus security trade-off that you need to explore.
And the next question is, can obfuscation techniques like Submarine Sends alleviate MEV for popular contracts? It might be useful to.
Have you tried doing a Submarine Send? It's off. The Submarine Send is like a two-phase protocol where you need to send a transaction to a random address that is not known by the person trying to front run you, which acts as a commit, and then you reveal. So like a Submarine Send is effectively a fancy commit reveal scheme trying to not leak information during the commit phase, because basically the commit reveal scheme, how it works is that, you know, instead of me telling to Robert's protocol, I want to trade, I send a hash to Robert's protocol, a block passes, and then I reveal my hash saying this was a trade, and then transactions get executed in the order of the hashes that were received. But even just the fact that somebody submitted a transaction with a certain hash leaks information that something happened. And this something happening may trigger bots, because the bots, maybe they expect certain activity at certain times by certain people. Whereas the Submarine Send, it tries to not leak the information of the commit. But in trying to do that, the protocol ends up being like very messy or very expensive and so on, and nobody wants to use it. So yes, you can use Submarine Sends and whatnot to mitigate MEV, but then protocol is like cumbersome to use and more expensive, and people don't love it. The more practical approach that one could use for MEV mitigation is threshold decryption, or SGX. Basically, you try to put as much of the complexity in protocol such that basically users never need to think about it at all. So basically, users submit by default encrypted transactions, and the encryption can happen at the library level. The user never needs to know about it. And then simply the decryption happens a block later, or after the miner has mined the block, such that there can be no front running by definition.
Awesome. I guess the next question on the list is, how does the recent crackdown on miners affect MEV? And that could mean kind of cracking down and banning that we've seen in countries like China, or just more broadly, kind of the regulation of miners as an entity.
We talked about it a bit earlier. Yeah, like miners may get enforced to do things. I don't know more about that.
Don't know anything about that either. I think it's important that we build systems that enshrine the general neutrality of miners. And that's one thing that Flashbots is trying to do by splitting the party that builds a block from the party that proposes a block, like a miner. So in general, I think like if you're talking about heightened regulatory attention, that's very important. If you're talking about just like the movement of hash rate out of some countries to another, I don't think that really affects MEV.
That makes sense. I guess to group a couple questions that are at the bottom and kind of all over is people interested in, potentially deploying their own MEV strategies. There's a few questions of how much does it cost to do a sandwich attack, et cetera, et cetera. Overall, if there's someone interested in kind of get their hands dirty, what is the playbook for kind of beginning to engage in MEV strategies? And is that possible for someone like us, so to speak?
My take is trial by fire. You learn Solidity, you learn like some language to write Python, JavaScript, Rust, Go, whatever you like. You go to the Flashbots Discord, you download some of the demo repositories that they built, which is like great for education. You read all the must-read MEV resources, which also you will find like very easily with a couple of Google searches. And then trial by fire. You need to run your bot on mainnet and see if it catches any fish. Likely the simulation endpoints, or rather, when you submit a bundle, if the bundle is not profitable for the miner will never mine it. So you don't have reverting transactions, which is great because you don't end up paying fees for all your failed attempts. So you can keep trying, you won't pay, it will make you very angry. Eventually, it will make you very happy when you land your first bundle.
We're conscious of time. We're sort of approaching the end here. So I guess there's a kind of a question that may be on some people's minds that I'm going to ask really quickly, which is how does MEV affect Bitcoin? And it might be helpful to kind of break down. I think it shouldn't be a too long an explanation of the the different mechanisms that differentiate Bitcoin versus the smart contracts on Ethereum.
MEV exists on Bitcoin in the form of when a Lightning channel can get closed. So Lightning is a layer 2 solution. It has a certain dispute period when somebody tries to close a channel. So the dispute period during which the channel can be closed can be abused by miners to try to steal the value inside the channel. And you can say that's MEV, and I will tell you that this is not going to happen because the miner is long-term aligned with the network and they're not going to screw things up. So MEV on Bitcoin, very limited, not that interesting.
I think the other way you might potentially see it in the future is if there's lots of Bitcoin being settled at the base layer, and like sort of ignore that Lightning exists. But if the layer 1 of Bitcoin settles a lot of Bitcoin in the future, you could see people paying for priority inclusion of their transactions, for example, to be the first that deposits at a centralized exchange to take advantage of an arbitrage opportunity. And maybe you're paying to be the only person that is able to move money in a block. So your competitors that are trying to close that arb as well don't get that. So I think there are cases in which it still would make sense to exercise those transaction ordering powers as a miner, even though there doesn't exist smart contracts on Bitcoin, to your point.
Perfect. Guys, I think, we're almost at time, and we just wanted to reiterate, Georgios, Robert, we're very grateful. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. We've learned like a lot, and we appreciate your time. Also quick thanks to the BAF team again, Cameron, Noor, Alexis. I know I'm probably missing someone out, and thank you to everyone who attended. Just quickly before we wrap up, what are the best ways to keep up to date, not just with you guys? I know your Twitter handles, but also MEV research in general, outside of the Flashbots Discord, of course, but kind of who are some of the top leaders in the space who you guys are keeping an eye on, and kind of where would someone who wants to keep themselves posted on the space look?
I think Georgios' Twitter is a great resource, and the Paradigm, the Paradigm Writings website in general is an excellent resource for MEV too. A lot of this stuff is just sort of circulated through Twitter, so I try to post a lot about MEV content. I know you already said my Twitter, but I think those are two top resources. And then if you keep an eye on the Flashbots research repo, which I'll also link, there's all sorts of content and like cutting edge stuff that's posted there. And thanks for having us, by the way.
Yeah, basically what you said. The reason why, like we say, the Discord, etc., is because they were by design made so that they are the canonical resource for all of this. So yeah, thank you for having us, and you know where to find us for any other questions.
We really appreciate. Yeah, I can confirm both your stuff on Twitter is great. Robert, loved your recent thread on versions 0.4 as well, or 0.04. But yeah, thank you guys very much. We appreciate it. If people want to linger around, chat to Roman and I for a sec, we'll be around for a few minutes. Cameron, if you want to say a couple of things.
Yeah, hey everybody, how's it going? President and founder of Blockchain Acceleration Foundation. Thank you, Robert and Georgios, for doing this. There's a networking event after this, so if you just want to stick around, chit chat with each other, this is sort of the place where the BAF network meets every week. You can join our Discord if you want to just chat throughout the week. BAF, just to let you know, next week is going to run its first event in Twitter Spaces. This is going to be an event to help blockchain clubs make sure that they're doing things to grow and accelerate their brand on campus. And then the following week is actually, we're doing decentralized storage with Filecoin, Arweave, and Siacoin, Skynet. So stick around and hopefully chat more in the networking component. But thank you again, everybody, and see you later.
So much.